the need for a well-informed public discourse has never been greater. And I think that's why this lecture series is such a moving tribute to the memory of Leslie Whittington. Just an aside, I was voting on the House floor a couple of days ago, and one of the senior leadership staffer, Cheryl Yeager, pulled me aside and she said, Leslie Whittington was the best professor I ever had. She was a student here at Georgetown and just spoke so adoringly of the impact she had on her life. So it's just nice to see that her memory is still being honored by this, and I'm honored to be here as part of this lecture series. It's also a pleasure to speak here at Georgetown, America's first Catholic university. It's one of thousands of great schools by the Jesuits, who have done a great job of educating our nation's youth for generations. I received a letter from some of your faculty, which I do appreciate the dialogue. I also brought a copy of my budget with me so that we can have a fact-based conversation on the facts as they are, not as I would say some have reinterpreted it. Do you ever hear about the story about the Methodist who went to heaven and met St. Peter at the pearly gates? You haven't? Okay, let me get into it then. So this Methodist goes to heaven, and he meets St. Peter at the pearly gates. And St. Peter takes him on a tour like he does for everybody. And they go down this beautiful building in this long hall. I imagine it's a building that kind of looks like this. And they come to the first door. And they hear laughter and music and singing. And the Methodist asked St. Peter, he said, what's behind that door? He said, oh, that's the Presbyterians. They keep going down the hallway. They come to another door. They hear praising and music. He says, what's behind that door? He said, that's the Baptists. Then they turn the corner and go down a long hall. But before they get back to the next door, St. Peter says, be very, very quiet. The Methodist says, why? He said, because that's the Catholics, and they think they're the only people up here. Yeah, that takes a minute to sink in, doesn't it? Yeah. I suppose that there are some Catholics who, for a long time, thought they had a monopoly of sorts. Not exactly on heaven, but on the social teaching of our church. Of course, there can be differences among faithful Catholics on this. The work I do as a Catholic holding office conforms to the social doctrine as best I can make of it. What I have to say about the social doctrine of the church is from the viewpoint of a Catholic in politics, applying my understanding to the problems of the day. Serious problems like those we face today require charitable conversation. Civil public dialogue goes to the heart of solidarity, the virtue that does not divide society into classes and groups, but builds up the common good of all. The overarching threat to our whole society today is the exploding federal debt. The Holy Father himself, Pope Benedict, has charged governments, communities, and individuals running up high debt levels are, quote, living at the expense of future generations and living in untruth, unquote. We in this country, we still have a window of time before a debt-fueled economic crisis becomes inevitable. We can still take control before our own needy suffer the same fate of Greece. How we do this is a question for prudential judgment, about which people of goodwill can differ. If there was ever a time for serious but respectful discussion among Catholics as well as those who don't share our faith, that time is now. As I go around southern Wisconsin and visit with Americans across the country, explaining that our debt is on track to cripple the economy, showing people charts and graphs to back it all up, they often ask me, is it too late? Is it too late to save America from a diminished future? Is the American experiment over? It's a difficult question. It's one that gives me a little pause. Frankly, it's one that keeps me up at night. But the honest answer is the one I'm about to give you. Nobody ever got rich betting against the United States of America, and I'm not about to start. Time and again, when America has been put to the test, when it looked like the era of American exceptionalism was coming to a close, we got back up, we brushed ourselves off, and we got back to work, advancing our community, advancing our society, and moving the boundaries of opportunity ever forward. Churchill put it best. The Americans can be counted upon to do the right thing, but only after they've exhausted all the other possibilities. Look, we have exhausted the other possibilities. After 4 straight trillion-dollar deficits and very little economic progress to show for it, I think we know what doesn't work. We also have a growing consensus around the ideas that will work. But we lack willing partners at the highest levels to lead us, to unite us, and to address our defining challenge. The President did not cause the crisis we face. Years of empty promises from both political parties brought us to this moment. But regrettably, the President is unwilling to advance credible solutions to the problem. He's broken the promise that he made during his last campaign to help us, quote, rediscover our bonds to each other and get out of this constant, petty bickering that's come to characterize our politics, end quote. He doesn't seem to understand that he can't promote the common good by setting class against class or group against group. The divisive politics of the last 3 years have not only undermined social solidarity, they have brought progress and reform to a standstill at a very time when America is desperate for solutions to this coming crisis. Today, we face a fundamental challenge to the American way of life, a gathering storm whose primary manifestation is the shadow of our ever-growing national debt, and whose most troubling consequence is ever-shrinking opportunity for Americans, young and old. This shadow hangs over young people who face a struggling economy and the rising probability of greater turmoil ahead. More than half of our recent college graduates are unemployed or underemployed in this economy. Half. This shadow hangs over our seniors who've been lied to about their retirement security. And it hangs over our parents. You know, we wonder if we will be the first generation in American history to leave our children with fewer opportunities in a less prosperous nation than the one that we inherited. This storm has already hit Europe, where millions are enduring the painful consequences of empty promises turning into broken promises. But for too many in Washington, instead of learning from Europe's mistakes, we're repeating them. Our descent down this path was accelerated 4 years ago, when poor decisions and bad policies from Wall Street to Washington resulted in a crisis that squandered the nation's savings and crippled our economy. What we needed then were policies to strengthen the foundations of our free enterprise economy. What we got was the opposite. We needed single-minded focus on restoring economic growth. After the immediate panic in late 2008 subsided, we needed to restore real accountability in the financial sector and just clean the mess up. We needed to restore the principle that those who seek to reap the gains in our economy also bear the full risk of the losses. We needed policies to control our debt trajectory so that families and businesses were not threatened by the shadow of an ever-rising debt. Instead, the White House and the last Congress enacted an agenda that made matters worse. They misspent hundreds of billions of dollars on politically connected boondoggles. Then, when the country's #1 priority remained getting the economy back on track, the White House and the last Congress made their #1 priority a massive unwanted expansion in the government's role in health care. They even tried to impose a costly increase in energy prices in the middle of a recession. And their idea of Wall Street reform, well, a blank check for Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, and a new law that provided more protection and preferential treatment for the big banks and gave more power to the same regulators who failed to see the last crisis coming. Their reliance on government's heavy hand, with more borrowing, more spending, and unprecedented interventions into the private sector, were not just bad policy. They created tremendous uncertainty for businesses and families as job losses continued to mount. We needed solutions to restore the American idea, an opportunity society in which the government's role is not to rig the rules and aim for equal outcomes, but, in the words of Abraham Lincoln, to clear the paths of laudable pursuit for all, so that all may have an equal opportunity to rise and freely pursue their happiness. Instead, the White House and the last Congress exploited a crisis to advance a government-centered society, a massively expanded role in the federal government in our lives, higher spending to support this expanded role, and higher taxes to support the higher spending. Higher borrowing, too. In 3.5 years, the debt held by the public has grown by roughly $4.5 trillion. That's a 70% increase. As bad as this is, our debt is projected to get much worse, spiraling out of control in the years ahead. This bleak outlook, this is what is paralyzing economic growth today, because investors, businesses, and families, they look at the size of the debt and they hold back for fear that America is heading for a diminished future. And should that future arrive, it would mean real pain for all Americans. Much higher interest rates would make it harder for families to buy homes, for students to go to college, and for businesses to expand and create jobs. But it would mean more than economic pain to you and me. If we remain on this path, bond markets in a state of panic will turn on us, threatening to end the American idea itself. Forced austerity, broken promises, and sacrifices imposed from abroad would put an end to that most fundamental of American aspirations, that in this land we are responsible for our own destiny, that on this continent we might forever be free from the foreign powers who would impose their limits on our dreams for ourselves and for our children. If our generation fails to meet its defining challenge, we would see America surrender her independence to an army of foreign creditors who now own roughly half of our public debt. It pains me to say this, but the President's policies guarantee that outcome if we don't turn this around soon. The good news is there's a better approach. A budget passed by the House of Representatives that would lift the debt and free the nation from the constraints of ever-expanding government. If enacted, this budget would promote economic growth and opportunity starting today, with bold reforms to the tax code and a credible, principled plan to prevent a debt crisis from ever happening. The President is clearly threatened by this alternative vision. He's hoping to win the next election by attacking our good faith effort to secure opportunity for the next generation. The President's not only wrong on the policy, but he's wrong on the politics as well. Americans resent being told what kind of car to drive or what kind of light bulb to use. And they certainly don't think bureaucrats in Washington should be empowered to dictate their personal health care decisions. The hallmarks of the President's government-centered agenda is that policy after policy takes from hardworking Americans and gives to politically connected companies and privileged special interests. Our budget calls this for what it is. It's corporate welfare, and we propose to end it. As we end welfare for those who don't need it, we strengthen welfare programs for those who do. Government safety net programs have been stretched to the breaking point in recent years, failing the very citizens who need help the most. These aren't just practical questions. These questions have moral implications as well. And since we meet here today at America's first Catholic university, I feel it's important to discuss how, as a Catholic in public life, my own personal thinking on these issues has been guided by my understanding of the Church's social teaching. Simply put, I don't believe that the preferential option for the poor means a preferential option for big government. Just look at the results of the government-centered approach to the war on poverty. 1 in 6 Americans are in poverty today. That's the highest rate in a generation. In this war on poverty, poverty's winning. We need a better approach. To me, this approach should be based on the twin virtues of solidarity and subsidiarity, virtues that, when taken together, revitalize civil society instead of displacing it. Government is one word for things we do together, but it's not the only word. We are a nation that prides itself on looking out for one another, and government has an important role to play in that. But relying on distant government bureaucracies to lead this effort, it just hasn't worked. Instead, our budget builds on the historic welfare reforms of the 1990s, reforms proven to work, bipartisan reforms. We aim to empower state and local governments, communities, and individuals, those closest to the problem. And we aim to promote opportunity and upward mobility by strengthening job training programs to help those who have fallen in hard times. You know, my mentor, Jack Kemp, used to say, "You can't help America's poor by making America poor." The president's failed economic policies have driven poverty rates to record highs. And the mountain of new debt he's helped create, much of it borrowed from China or simply printed down the road at the Federal Reserve, has made America poorer. Those unwilling to lift the debt are complicit in our acceleration toward a debt crisis in which the poor would be hurt the first and the worst. Our budget lifts the debt, fosters a growing economy, and ensures that a government program makes good on their important promises. Instead of letting our critical health and retirement programs go bankrupt, our budget saves and strengthens them so that they can fulfill their missions in the 21st century. The president likes to talk about Medicare. We welcome the debate. We need this debate. What the president won't tell you is that he's already changed Medicare forever. His new health care law puts a board of 15 unelected bureaucrats in charge of cutting Medicare. Look, we should never turn the fate of our parents and grandparents over to an unaccountable board and let it make decisions that could deny them access to their care. My mom relies on Medicare. We owe her and all of our seniors a better program, one that they can actually count on. Our budget keeps the protections that have made Medicare a guaranteed promise to seniors throughout the years. It makes no changes for people in or near retirement. And in order to save Medicare for future generations, we propose to put 50 million seniors, not 15 unaccountable bureaucrats, in charge of their personal health care decisions. Our budget empowers seniors to choose from a list of coverage that works best for them, that is required to offer at least the same benefits as traditional Medicare. It sets up a financial support system designed to guarantee that they can always afford coverage. And it says that if a senior wants to choose the traditional Medicare plan, then she should have that right. Our idea is to force insurance companies to compete against each other in order to better serve seniors, with more help for the poor and the sick and less help for the wealthy. Or, as President Obama likes to call it, social Darwinism. Of course, we disagree with that characterization. Our plan offers the best way to guarantee quality, affordable health care for all of our nation's seniors for generations to come. The president also likes to talk about taxes. We welcome this debate. We need this debate. The president remains committed to taking more and more paychecks, more and more from the paychecks of working Americans, not to pay down the debt, but rather to chase ever higher government spending. We believe there's a better way forward. A world-class tax code should be fair, simple, and competitive. The U.S. tax code fails on all three counts. We propose a total overhaul of the tax code. We lower rates across the board, but revenue goes up every year under our budget because the economy grows, and we propose to close those special interest loopholes that primarily go to the well-connected and the well-off. When we lower tax rates by closing special interest loopholes, we're saying we in Washington don't need to micromanage people's decisions through the tax code. Let people keep more of their hard-earned money. Let them decide how to spend it. The Path to Prosperity budget passed the House earlier this spring. The Senate has gone another year without a budget, and the president has hunkered down into campaign mode. People are right to look at how polarized our politics have become, and they wonder if we're ever going to fix this mess. The political class feeds the pessimism. The voices of cynicism have given up on American renewal. They say America's time for leading the world is past, and our most important task is now to manage the nation's decline. I reject such defeatism. America has been here before. We didn't give up then, and we won't give up now. Maybe the cynics don't remember 1980, another moment when so many in Washington had given up on the American people. As Ronald Reagan put it, they expect you to tell your children that the American people no longer have the will to cope with their problems, that the future will be one of sacrifice and few opportunities. But America did something that we as a people are famous for. We refused to listen to our betters. We voted for a man, but more than that, we voted for an idea. The idea that if we took power from bureaucrats and returned it to the people, Americans working together could restore the principles of American exceptionalism and build a future that they and their children could be proud of. These principles are not exclusive to one political party. The patient-centered Medicare reforms and the pro-growth tax reforms that we've advanced in the House, they have a long history of bipartisan support. Medicare reforms based on choice and competition have their roots in the Clinton administration's bipartisan commission on the future of Medicare. And in recent years, I've worked with Democrats to advance the same kinds of reforms. Democrats who are on your faculty, I just now learned. It's a great lady, by the way. Tax reforms based on lowering rates and closing loopholes, they go back to the Reagan administration. Democrats served as the congressional co-sponsors of the landmark 1986 tax reform. More recently, the chairman of President Obama's Bipartisan Fiscal Commission put forward a plan to lower rates and broaden the base as the best means to simplify the tax code and spur economic growth. It makes sense that these ideas have attracted leaders in both parties. Patient-centered Medicare offers the only guarantee that Medicare can keep its promise to seniors for generations to come. And pro-growth tax reform, by lowering rates for all Americans while closing loopholes that primarily benefit the well-off, can eliminate unfairness in the tax code and can ensure a level playing field for all. This coalition for reform must attract Americans from all walks of life. But progress will require the removal of certain partisan roadblocks, a flawed health care law that must be replaced, and an insistence from some in Washington on tax hikes and tax gimmicks instead of tax reform. Only with the right leadership in place can we move forward with ideas that renew the American promise of leaving our children with a stronger nation than the one our parents left us. Look, it is rare in American politics to arrive at a moment in which the debate revolves around the fundamental nature of American democracy and the social contract. But that is exactly where we are today. One approach gives more power to unelected bureaucrats, takes more from hardworking taxpayers to fuel the expansion of government, and commits our nation to a future of debt and decline. This approach is proving unworkable in Congress, in our courts, in our communities. This path fails to do justice to either subsidiarity or solidarity. It dissolves the common good of society, and it dishonors the dignity of the human person. Our budget offers a better path, consistent with the timeless principles of our nation's founding, and frankly, consistent with how I understand my Catholic faith. We put trust in people, not in government. Our budget incorporates subsidiarity by returning power to individuals, to families, and to communities. We draw inspiration from the founders' belief that all people are born with a God-given right to human flourishing. Protecting this equal right of all persons is required for solidarity. Trusting citizens, not nameless government officials, to determine what is in their best interest and to make the right choices about the future of our country. The choice before us could not be more clear. Continuing down the path we are on would mean becoming the first generation to break faith with the American legacy of leaving the next generation with more prosperity and greater opportunities than our parents left us. If there is one thing you hear me say today, hear this. This will not be our destiny. Americans won't stand for a shrunken vision of our future. We will get back on a path to prosperity. It is not too late to get this right. Thank you very much.